Finally, and last but not least, I would like to introduce the final speaker of the session. He's Dr. Andreas Sichler. He's the Director of Education in the OECD organization. He will speak about the quality of education, importance, and tools to improve it. The organization has great experience. It's been influencing the different thinking and directions in a number of countries. The floor is yours. Oh, thank you very much.
First of all, it's a great honor and privilege to share my thoughts with you this morning, and I thank our hosts for the excellent hospitality here. Every 3 years, my organization evaluates the quality of education around the world. We look at what students are able to do. We test students' performance. We look at some of the factors that contribute to the success of education systems, and so on. And we do that in a rapidly changing world, in a world that has seen a lot of profound changes over the last decades. In the past, we considered learning a place. We brought children to school. Now we recognize that learning is an activity that extends through everything, from birth to later life. In the past, teachers were often left alone in classrooms with a lot of prescription of what to teach. Now the most successful education systems are very clear about what students should be able to do. And they enable teachers to use the tools that are needed for them to succeed with their children. The past was about delivered wisdom. The future is about user-generated wisdom. In the past, all students were taught in similar ways. The most successful systems today engage and embrace diversity in students' interests, motivations, capacities, and so on, the personalized learning. The past was curriculum-centered. The most successful systems now are learner-centered. The past was about the provision of education, how many places for students. Now it's about outcomes, learning success, and so on. So these things have fundamentally changed through our education systems. Let me start with an example of how education and economic success have been linked in the past. If you go to the 1960s, you could map the world's most wealthy regions very neatly against the years of education that people have had acquired. Basically, wealth and education in terms of years of education were perfectly linked. But if you go to the year 2000, you could see that this did not work anymore very well. You could see some nations that saw a lot of economic growth, like in East Asia. They did not have as much years of education than other nations. So something seems to have gone wrong in the link between education and economic success. And you can interpret those data in two ways. You can say, A, maybe education is not so important for economic success as we thought it was. Or you can argue maybe years of schooling, the quantity of education, is not as good a predictor for economic success as we thought. And you can solve that puzzle when you actually look at the quality of education. We don't measure the quantity, but the quality. You can see suddenly that education, the quality of education and economic success almost line up perfectly across the world regions. And that's a very, very important lesson. It's not quantity, it's quality that counts for success. At the OECD, we have been measuring the quality of education. We've been measuring the quality of education through our PISA assessment. We started in a small group of countries, but today we can talk about almost 90% of the world economy in terms of the quality of education that is provided to young people. Let me just briefly introduce the program that we use for that. We've tested just in 2009 over 500,000 students. They took an internationally agreed 2-hour test to look at what they're able to do. And one of the things that is important is we were not so interested whether students can reproduce what they have been taught. We were more interested whether students can extrapolate from what they know and apply their knowledge in a novel context, whether they can think creatively, imaginatively, and do new things. And of course, we also collected a lot of background data from students to understand better what this is about. We're doing this to support governments to prepare students to deal with rapid change in our world, to educate them for jobs that haven't been created, to use technologies that haven't been invented to solve problems that we don't know yet what exist. It's very difficult to look at education around the world. But you can also do that to get a sense of what's possible in education. I want to basically start with showing you how education systems line up. In the red area, I show you the education systems that don't do so well. Yellow is sort of so-so, and green are the really high-performing countries. You can see at the top of the world league is Shanghai in China. You have other Asian countries doing really well, Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong, and so on. Finland in Europe at top-performing systems. Canada in North America. So in every part of the world, you find some systems that do really very well. There's another dimension I want to look with you at as well. In some education systems, there are large disparities in outcomes. The gap between winners and losers is very strong. In other systems, we see that education is much more equitably distributed. And everybody wants to be in that quarter where performance is very strong and social disparities are small. Nobody wants to be there where performance is poor and there are large social disparities. Some people say it's better to do well on average and accept disparities. Other people say focus on equity and accept mediocrity. But actually, when you look at how the data come out, you can see that there are a fair number of countries that achieve quality and quality consistently, irrespective of the social background of students. Again, if you look at the top performer in Shanghai, it is not only the children of rich families that succeed, but almost every school provides excellence. And that's what quality is about. Every education system in the world has some great schools, but a great education system produces quality consistently. For some of the education systems, we have data over time. I'm showing you in sort of dots like this. And I make it more complicated. The size of the dots represents the money that is spent per student. No? The larger the dot, the more money is invested per student. If money would be everything in education that counts for success, you would find all the large dots up. No? All the high-performing countries putting a lot of money in their students, and all the low-performing countries spending very little. But that's not what you see. Money is important, but not sufficient for the success of education systems. This is how the world looked in the year 2000. Quite different from how it is today. And I want to show you just a couple of examples. If you look at Korea, as you saw, is one of the most successful education systems today. Also in the year 2000, they were really doing well. But in the year 2000, Korea didn't say, oh, we're doing fine, let's stay here. Korea thought, we need to be better at the elite, at the top performing students. And you could see basically, this is where Korea stood. This is where Korea is now. Enormous progress in just 10 years. You can look at Chile, moving from the bottom to the middle of the pack, or Hungary, moving from there to there, Poland. A lot of countries really moving up. Germany. Germany was always good in math and science, but not so good in literacy. But you could see a lot of progress has been achieved in a very limited period of time. The world is changing. In this changing world, it's no longer enough to improve nationally. Every country is becoming better. That's not difficult to achieve. But in this rapidly changing world, it's the most successful education systems that set the benchmark for success. I want to I don't have data for Saudi Arabia here, but I want to illustrate this point of quality with an example from Qatar. Here I show you the social background on the horizontal axis, on the vertical axis, the quality of schools and students. And now you see every school is one dot. The larger dots are the larger schools, the smaller dots are the smaller schools. The green dots are the private schools, the white dots are the public schools, and so on. The first thing you see is there's some relationship between social background and learning outcomes. The schools of poor families tend to have poorer results, to the left. The schools of the richer families tend to have better results. But there's also a lot of variability. For example, and I wanted to show you, for example, when you look at just this slice, these are all schools of poor families' children. But you can see some do really well, and some are doing really poor. You can do the same thing at the other end of the spectrum if you believe that just spending a lot of money, just becoming from a wealthy family, guarantees you a good school. Not so. A lot of variability in the school performance, and this is what quality is about. And now you might argue, well, that's quite natural that school performance varies a lot. But again, if you go to Shanghai, no school in Shanghai performs below the red line. No school in Finland performs below the red line. Every school succeeds. That's where quality is become an attribute of the system. And every school is successful. In Qatar, you also have some schools that are doing as well as schools in Shanghai. But in Shanghai or Finland, every school performs at that level. You can look at this more systematically. You can look at the variability in performance between schools. And if you go to the right side, and performance variability within schools, you can see Finland. There's almost no performance variability between schools. As a parent, it doesn't matter to which school you send your child because you can rely on the quality of the system. And now you say, well, Finland is a very special case, but let's have a look at the case of Shanghai. Another of those countries very successful. And how do they do that? Because Shanghai is able to attract the most qualified principals into the most challenging schools. And actually, the mayor of Shanghai can tell you that better than I do. Can we have the sound for the video? Well, you see the subtitles there as well. I think that tell you something about this.
当然也得到了社区的广泛的认同与支持，于是我们就开展了这项工作。那么这项工作是怎么来做的呢？从政府来说，我们出台了相应的政策，就是鼓励与支持办学相对好的学校与相对困难的学校结成对子。第二呢，我们好的学校与相对困难学校结成对子呢，我们要签订一个合作办学的协议。这个合作办学协议里面呢，就是明确了各自的责任、权利与义务。
This was just an example of how a system, and actually Shanghai is a very diverse and rather poor economy by international, by OECD standards, has been successful in mobilizing its own education system. Does schooling make a difference for the future of people? It does. You can actually see our data show when we follow up individuals from the age of 15 when we tested them, you can see that their knowledge at age 15 is a very powerful predictor for their future success. And the predictive power of what you know at school is even stronger at age 21 than it was at age 19. So over time, it increases. And interestingly, the predictive power of the quality of education is far stronger than the predictive power of the judgments that are made by teachers every day in schools. They also predict something, but they're actually much less predictive of the success of children. I want to come back to this chart. You remember that's the standing of countries. Imagine we would be able to improve the quality of education in every country by a bit, by around 20 points. 25 points, that's about what the most successful systems have achieved in the last 10 years. The economic impact of that would be phenomenal. We can say that in the area of the OECD, our economies would be about $115 trillion richer over the life cycle of those children in the school system today if we succeed to raise the quality of education by a margin that has proved to be feasible. So we're not talking about just a social phenomenon here. We talk about a major economic resource that lies sleeping. The quality, the high cost of low education performance. I just wanted to conclude my presentation, I'm going to skip that, with a few pointers of what successful systems have been able to do. One of the things is how much money is being spent. The second question is, how do successful systems spend their money? You can see, for example, if you look at the example of Korea, they spend a lot of money on teacher salaries. They try to attract the best people into the teaching profession. Korea also buys a lot of instruction time. This costs money, drives costs upwards. And then Korea provides teachers with a lot of opportunities to learn from other teachers, to work with other teachers, to build quality into every school. It costs money. How does Korea pay for this? It doesn't have that much money. It pays for this with very large classes. If you go to the next country on the list, to Luxembourg, in Luxembourg, teachers and parents like small classes. So all the money is being invested in creating small classes. But you can spend your money only once. So what happens in Luxembourg is that there's no money for good teachers, there's no money for lots of instruction time, and teachers have very little opportunity to develop their careers once they are in school. And when you look at this chart long enough, you can see many of the successful systems are more like Korea. They invest the resources into a high-quality teaching force. I want to come to conclude my presentation with a number of other factors that we have found to matter for the success of education. The first is about a commitment to education and the belief that competencies are not acquired by birth, but they are achieved through hard work and learning. Successful systems have universal standards and use personalization as the approach to deal with different students. They don't do tracking, streaming, and so on. Second point, successful education systems set clear, ambitious goals and align them with high-stakes examination systems. It matters what you know in school. It matters for your future life. Third point, successful systems attract, develop, and retain high-quality teachers. They provide instructional leadership and human resource management in schools. They also keep teaching an attractive profession. If you look what the Finnish Minister of Education had to say for this. Can we have the sound again?
I think one of the main reasons behind the good learning outcomes and results is the good teacher education. All the teachers, they have master's degree from the university in Finland, and because the teacher's profession is very highly appreciated in Finnish society, so it means that all the universities, they can select the best students to become a teacher. So of course it's helped because then they can get the most motivated and best people to become a teacher.
The next factor, it's about incentives, accountability, knowledge management. And accountability is not just about more tests, more accountability from the top, but it is more and more to do with what we call lateral accountability, how you work with your teachers as colleagues, how you learn from your teachers, how a school learns from the neighboring school. The best performing education systems know how to develop and spread strong knowledge. Another point, and I just wanted to show you this. People talk about accountability and talk about autonomy. Both are important predictors. But basically, if you think about systems with more accountability, you can see that schools with more autonomy achieve better. In a system with a culture of accountability, autonomy is a good thing. If you go to systems with less accountability, actually you see the reverse. Autonomy detracts from good performance. So be careful how you position those kinds of policy concepts in an environment. The most successful systems have very, very strong systems of accountability and give teachers and schools a lot of professional discretion. Next point, investing resources where they can make most of a difference. Some of you may have wondered when you see the United States. The United States spends an enormous amount of money on education, but doesn't come out very well on international comparisons. Because the United States invests the money mainly where it already is. If you live in a rich neighborhood, you get a great school. If you live in a poor neighborhood, you get a poor school. So if you look to Shanghai, you saw the example, getting the best people to the greatest challenge. And we can see how the story concluded, if I can have the sound again.
第一轮的时候，那对我们来讲，这个办法一下子改变了很多学校、几所学校的面貌，我们信心就得到了很大的增长。比如说，有的学校原来成绩一直往下掉，这个家长就带着孩子跑到其他学校去了。但是，当我们这所比较薄弱的学校委托给一个专业团队管理以后，1年、2年。 学生都回来了，而且很多原来不在这里上学的孩子，他的爸爸妈妈都带着孩子到这个学校里面来，所以从学生的大逃亡，一直到很多家长孩子愿意到这所学校来，这2年时间里面发生了迅速的变化，所以使得我们感觉到这个办法看来还是能够改变薄弱学校的一个好办法。
So what I wanted to focus on here, yes, I'm going to, yes, yeah. What I wanted to focus on here is that in a period of 6 years, a country with, or a province with 30 million children has succeeded in enabling every school to be successful. Looking outward is important, and finally, doing all of this in a way that is coherent over time, over all aspects of the system, and to implement education policies and practices successfully. That's what we have seen in the most successful education systems. And I want to conclude with a very brief clip from Canada. Oops. If I can have the sound again.
First of all, you need to bring to the task a sense of urgency, a sense that this is a very high priority. Then you need a plan. Then you need to enlist people to your cause, teachers included. And then you need persistence. Well, close to 4 out of 10 Ontario students are immigrants. So we have a student population that is extremely rich in its diversity.
What I wanted to tell you here is, again, Canada, the province of Ontario, has not taken a century to get to where it is, but in a period of 8 years in this case, it has achieved remarkable success. So, what you can see from global comparisons, there are huge differences in the quality of education systems around the world. Some systems achieve a high level of consistent quality throughout the education systems. And there's a lot of change. There's a lot of movement. Success is possible, and we've learned a lot about how it can be achieved. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Andreas. And it's always difficult to decide on what to measure and how to measure it.